Australia is experiencing an unprecedented housing crisis.
Australia is in the midst of a housing crisis, and now it could be about to get worse.
The true cost of the Sydney housing crisis is being laid bare tonight with some shocking figures.
Making it almost impossible for many young Australians to buy a home, but also even to rent one.
The growth rate of rent across the country went from 2% a year to 9.1%.
According to data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, in 2023, Australia's population grew by 660,000, including 550,000 net overseas migrants, while the new building start of residential housing was only 102,200, merely 40% of the actual demand for new homes. The number of new starts has shown a yearly declining trend. Since the pandemic, an influx of immigrants into Australia has caused house prices and rents to surge by 30% to 55%, making it unaffordable for countless middle and low-income Australians, even forcing real estate industry professionals to move away from the city centre to the suburbs. The term housing crisis couldn't be more appropriate. This scenario isn't just in Australia, but also in international cities in the USA, Canada, and Europe. Whether buying or renting, it's becoming increasingly unaffordable, and it looks like nothing can change that. However, the situation is entirely different in Tokyo, the world's largest group of cities, or megalopolis. The Tokyo area houses nearly 40 million people. The 23 wards, which is a small area compared to the greater Tokyo, accommodate 9.3 million people. Although Tokyo's area exceeds New York's, its population growth is equally rapid. What's different is Tokyo has successfully avoided a severe housing crisis. Compared to the cities like Sydney, London, Singapore, and even Shanghai, Tokyo's rents and house prices are astonishingly affordable, leading some to say Tokyo is the last affordable major city in the world. Why are Tokyo's housing prices and rents so stable? If you're unfamiliar with Japan, you might attribute this to an aging and declining population. After all, fewer people means less demand for housing, right? But that's not the reality. Over the past 15 years, the population of the Tokyo area has increased by about 1 million, while rents have only risen by 20%. How does Tokyo cope with ultra-high density and soaring population? Why are housing prices and rents not increasing as fast, making them affordable for more everyday people? What can Western countries, including Australia, learn, and what is simply unattainable? The most critical question is, if Australia adopts the Tokyo model, what does it mean for the residents and the real estate investors 20 years from now? Hi, my name is Alex. Welcome to Oz Property Strategy, where I share information about real estate investment, economic trends, and wealth creation. If you like this video, smash the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to watch new weekly videos. Without further ado, let's get into it. Why are Tokyo's housing prices and rents so stable? Over the past 15 years, Tokyo's population has increased by 1 million, yet rent has only risen by 20%. In Australia, however, rents have soared nearly 50% in just 3 years. A major reason for Tokyo's modest increase is its massive housing construction, which stabilizes prices and rents. Look at Japan's census data. Since 1968, the number of properties in Tokyo has exceeded the number of households every year. And this gap continues to widen. So what happened in 1968? What changed in Tokyo that allowed for sufficient housing supply while development in Australian cities has stalled? The story of housing in Tokyo begins with the Japanese economic miracle, which lasted from the end of the World War II to the end of the Cold War. During this period, Japan's economy grew rapidly. This chart shows the post-war economic growth trend in Japan, almost a straight climb. How did Tokyo manage to build so many houses? Can we learn from these experiences to solve Australia's housing issues? The story starts post-World War II. At the end of World War II, Japan surrendered and ended the conflict, facing a nation in ruins. Many industries had been converted to produce military goods during the war, and big companies were all in monopoly. Continuous air raids had destroyed a vast number of houses, land use was mismanaged, and there was a severe housing shortage. The United States intervened in the Japanese economy after the war, helping to draft a new constitution and investing in the Japanese society, partly for its own interests. The US was concerned that a weak Japanese economy would lead to the rise of communism, which would increase the Soviet Union's influence in East Asia, a situation the US wanted to avoid. During those years of striving for a new life in Japan, the Soviet threat began to spread in the East. In 1950, the Korean War broke out, and the US designated Japan as a strategic center in Asia, significantly increasing investment in Japan. Japan received massive production contracts for US military supplies. The US military purchased a vast amount of materials in Japan, making Yokohama port a logistical hub. The gathered resources were mainly uniforms, military blankets, tents, and other fiber and textile products, as well as steel pipes, wire mesh for frontline fortifications, various steel materials, concrete, and various foods. It stimulated Japanese agriculture, processing, light and heavy industries. Between 1950 and 1952, military contract amount totaled 1 billion, skyrocketing to 3.6 billion by 1955. The Japanese made money and began to develop domestic industries and strengthen infrastructure construction, known at the time as the special demand boom. The Korean War marked the rise of Japanese industry, leading to the subsequent Japanese economic miracle. Japan quickly became the world's second largest economy after the United States. However, as cities and their populations grew, lack of planning led to various problems such as congestion and pollution. The biggest issue was uncontrolled urban sprawl. Like other advanced economies of the time, Tokyo expanded outward, driven by population growth, causing urban expansion without any planning. Uncontrolled urban area growth also led to people fleeing the city center due to pollution and traffic congestion, moving to new suburbs on the outskirts of the city. However, outward expansion brought high costs because all public infrastructure had to be built fresh. Commuting times increased, traffic congestion worsened, and overall economic efficiency declined. Urban population growth outpaced housing construction. Just as Tokyo was heading toward explosive increase in population, housing prices, and rents due to supply constraints, a law emerged that changed everything. In 1968, the Urban Planning Law was introduced, a reform that improved urban planning processes, addressed issues of urban expansion, and laid a solid foundation for Japan's zoning system, paving the way to eliminate Tokyo's housing crisis. Japan's zoning system is unique and unlike the complex systems seen in other major countries, including Australia, which has dozens of different zoning types and incompatible city-specific systems. In contrast, Japan has only 12 types of land zoning, encouraging mixed use. Some zones are specifically for low-rise housing and schools, but importantly, housing can be built in all zoning types. Some zonings are suited for small businesses and restaurants, but housing can also be built there. Others allow for offices and commercial buildings, but also permit housing construction. This inclusiveness in Japanese zoning has several clear effects. First, it allows Tokyo to build a large number of homes. This is why since 1968, the number of houses has always exceeded the number of households, and the gap continues to grow. Second, this inclusiveness also allows for higher density apartment buildings. Tokyo can build mixed-use communities, which not only have public transportation, but also coffee shops and small stores on the ground floor of apartment buildings, with schools just around the corner and temples and shrines next to the train stations. In short, these are places you'd want to live and can afford to live. However, this scenario of housing affordability faced a significant challenge in the 1980s, nearly derailing everything. After experiencing rapid economic growth in the 60s and 70s, Japan entered the economic bubble era of the 1980s. Tokyo also faced a second post-war wave of urban expansion and population explosion. The 1960 Urban Planning Law was outdated and could no longer meet Tokyo's needs. By the 1980s, Tokyo had become a large and chaotic city, predominantly filled with unplanned low-rise buildings desperately needing redevelopment. As Japan's economic bubble grew larger, Tokyo's land prices spiraled out of control, with housing prices and rents skyrocketing, mirroring the experiences of many major cities today. In Tokyo at the time, you would see the world's most expensive concrete jungle, a place where even real estate agents couldn't afford to buy homes. Workers were forced to move to the outskirts of the major cities. For most people, the economic bubble was not a celebration but more like a curse. It was during this time that one man stepped forward, rewriting the rules, ensuring that Tokyo would never again lack housing, stabilizing housing prices and rents. This man was Yasuhiro Nakasone, who served as Prime Minister of Japan from 1982 to 1989. Starting in Tokyo, he sought city council approval for developers to build housing with high density. But the city council said no, as the residents voting for them did not want large-scale development. Therefore, he had no choice but to change the laws. Local councils now lost control, and urban planning became a national matter. granting developers the discretion to plan for high-density housing and removing the people's right to decide what could be built next to their homes. The city center had already become a battlefield, a losing battle for those who hoped to spend their remaining years in old houses. Even protected buildings could be demolished and rebuilt under the new laws. Traditional communities in the city center quickly disappeared. Before the demolition teams arrived, landlords received a large compensation. If they refused, developers would hire gang members to harass residents, vandalize property, and break their spirit and resistance. Sometimes developers would knock down walls and break into homes overnight, even before selling them, making them unrentable. Some holdouts became like the old man from the movie Up. In a sense, the prime minister at the time indirectly struck a blow to those resisting demolition and the construction of high-density housing, centralizing approval rights. What? Need more houses? No problem. Demolish and rebuild high-rises. Since then, Tokyo has never lacked housing, and housing prices have largely remained stable. Of course, Tokyo's housing prices have soared in the last 2 years, with many people investing there, but this is not due to the rapid population growth or lack of new housing supply, but rather due to international speculative factors. In 2023 alone, Tokyo's housing price rose by 40%, but the yen also fell by nearly 40%, making it unclear whether international investors profited. And the expensive homes that drove up prices are in prime areas within the 23 wards, not significantly affecting the everyday people. Thus, in a densely populated international metropolis like Tokyo, maintaining relatively low housing prices and rents so that most ordinary people can afford them is achieved in this way. By leveraging the force of law, all obstacles to developing high-density residential areas are cleared, preventing anyone from stopping property development, even if the entire community disagrees with it. In Australia, the United States, or Europe, developers looking to build any type of residence face hundreds of regulations, dictating everything from the number of parking spaces, maximum density, height proportions to green space ratios, etc. Complying with all these rules means that constructing anything is extremely expensive, making it difficult to build high-density housing and inefficient use of space. Additionally, zoning regulations typically restrict the type of housing that can be built within an area, often allowing only one specific type, such as detached houses. This can mean that large communities with houses are built and occupied before the infrastructure is in place. However, in Tokyo, these restrictions are almost non-existent. Japan's zoning law encouraged mixed-use areas, meaning that within a single block, various types of housing can coexist, and the buildings can differ in shape, height, and size. Practices not permitted in most parts of Australia, United States, and Europe. Tokyo's zoning laws barely regulate the density of these areas, how many parking spaces needed, or what the buildings should look like, which is why you see a variety of housing facades in Tokyo. Thus, Japanese zoning law can use space more effectively, allowing for the construction for many homes in a relatively small area. There's also a perception that seems democratic, but actually sacrifices the overall benefit and development of cities, known as NIMBY, or not in my backyard.
Nobody wants you to build low-cost housing near their house. You've heard of it, it's called NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, not in my backyard.
Want to build houses? Sure, just not near my home. On the surface, this is due to concerns about congestion of public resources like transportation, schools, and hospitals, or even high-rises blocking my home's natural lighting. But the underlying logic is that more housing supply will decrease the value of my home, which, of course, no one wants to see.
Not in my backyard.
Hence, you find people opposing development, especially high-rises. However, in Tokyo and most cities in Japan, this NIMBY phenomenon does not exist. Not just because of a different mentality, but because in Japan, such phenomenon is not allowed. Residents have no say in what kind of houses can be built near their homes. Only national laws and developers can decide. Over time, people have grown accustomed to these social rules, as they ultimately benefit the public and the community by reducing social disparities and improving the well-being and happiness of everyone. Then there's the inheritance tax. Japan has one of the highest inheritance taxes in the world, reaching up to 50%. If parents own a house and wish to pass it on to their children, no tax is payable in Australia, but in Japan, half of it would be taxed away. Under the influence of such high tax rates, nobody wants to hold on to real estate for a lifetime only to pass it down through the inheritance and lose half of it. Japanese real estate differs from that in other countries in its attributes. In Australia, a house is an investment that preserves, but in Japan, a house is more like a consumer good with a slightly longer usage period. Japan experiences the most earthquakes of any country, a factor that has led to unique approaches in urban planning and building constructions. The insurance regulations are updated periodically, so to ensure insurance coverage and enhance the reliability of properties, they are not built to last forever, like 100 years, but rather with the mentality of manufacturing a refrigerator. They need to be replaced once in a few years. This allows the land in Japan to retain its value, but the buildings themselves depreciate quite quickly. The nearer the house, the more expensive it is. People generally prefer not to live in second-hand homes, but to buy land and build a new one, or to demolish and rebuild a second-hand home. New constructions are designed to meet current family needs, with most buildings having a lifespan of only 30 years, after which they're usually demolished and rebuilt. This also ensures that the buildings on the block can be constructed taller or shorter as needed, offering great flexibility. These characteristics are absent in Australia and many Western countries. Fortunately, Australia has already taken the first steps towards the Tokyo model. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth have all amended laws to bring the right to subdivide land under state government control and plan to build a large number of high-density residences in many locations. Sydney and Melbourne are planning extensive apartment developments around the transport hubs, such as near train stations. Japanese developers have entered the Australian market, bringing their experience from massive apartment developments in Tokyo. For example, Tokyo's Odakyu Electric Railway Company has invested heavily in building high-rise apartments in Sydney. When it comes to developing apartments near railway lines, no one can surpass their experience. If Australia firmly allows the Tokyo model, it won't be long before the pressure on the real estate market eases, the supply of housing increases, and the pace of price rises slows, and rents become more affordable. In this scenario, the price increase potential for apartments near transportation hubs would be limited, while the number of detached houses not within the 800-meter radius of transport hub, especially family-suitable detached houses, may decrease and potentially appreciate more than the average, offering more investment return. Of course, depending on the circumstances of each city, my predictions may need local adjustments. The era of affordable Australian houses may indeed arrive, but we don't know when. And the affordable properties are those that can be easily built on demand. The issue is that Australia's situation is entirely different from Japan's and faces many challenges. There's the inheritance tax issue, which is certainly not a domain any politician would want to touch. Australia is unlikely to experience major earthquakes, so the consumer good characteristics of buildings and building insurance are unlikely to emerge. Fortunately, the government has now taken the first step towards increasing the housing supply to address public welfare issues. What I want to say is that there's always a way to change if the desire exists. And what investors need to do now is essentially nothing. Just to watch, wait, and adjust investment strategies in a timely manner. If you made it this far, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this with your friends. Turn on the notification bell to watch new weekly videos. Have a good one. Bye-bye.